They won't believe anyway. They'll never believe. And you'll always get that certain part of society that will not believe it.
Well, you kind of got 90%.
No, you see, we're very surprised. See, it was all well and good. That was bad enough. Then they wanted to bring your children along.
Agus leffe.
Even glad to go on. Now we're fine. Some side of the speaker that
It is.
the sugar only over.
Joseph for CivilRights. We'll get underway in 1 minute.
What's your name? Isabel. Mary.
What's your name? Andrew.
No, I'm just here for human rights.
What's your name, by the way? Mary. There you go. Where was it? Always have me.
Mr. Donnelly to the main desk, please. Mr. Donnelly.
Yeah, no, it's typical Irish. Someone else has solved the problem.
That guy
It's
should
like,
have
no,
been
we're not
gets
the only
lost.
people who solve this problem.
As you know, with a homing device or something, you know.
They're like something from China.
We get them in the health shop downtown. Three Stooges. I believe no, that's 4. That's 7. Okay, so you can catch up.
Yeah, Bridget.
You can catch up. The issue 8, I think, is out just the other day. I think Gemma O'Doherty and there's a few. They're exposing the truth. But that's why
Don't make a difference which one you get.
Okay, lads, have it cut us now. Manigi is stuck to here at Banner and Saugus. When the traffic is stopped, we just cross here.
No, Sinn Féin.
oh, Sinn Féin are red.
The repeal of all emergency legislation when it comes up for vote before the end of March. Join us for a rally and speakers over the aftermarket in Palestine. I propose for civil rights and the repeal of all emergency legislation. Respect for human rights is vital to a democratic and healthy society. Join us for a rally at the aftermarket in a few moments. The last repeal of emergency legislation will be followed for renewal after the 24th of March. Human rights are illegitimate and can't be left in the hands of any individual or any government to give and take at any time. Lawyers, this is the rally for truth and civil rights. Speakers will be at the Apple Market in a few moments. Last repeal of all emergency legislation. Demand the withdrawal of digital certificates at the European Union with time extension for another 12 months. Human rights are inalienable and cannot be made arbitrary with the decision of any government. Demand the repeal of emergency powers. Visit your CDs, visit your MEPs, ask them to vote no for the renewal of emergency powers.
That's good to know. Just look to Eleanor.
But they can't go, you're working on the
No, are the meetings on?
Demand the repeal of emergency powers. No to the denial of human and civil rights. Join us for a rally at the Waterford City. Rally for truth and for civil rights. Demands for the repeal of emergency legislation. Demands for the repeal of emergency powers. Join us for a rally with speakers up at the aftermarket.
I know the side.
Emergency powers are due to be renewed subsequent or following the 31st of March. It is important that these emergency powers are voted down. We ask you to contact your TDs and your MEPs, asking them to vote no to any renewal of emergency legislation. Civil rights and human rights are important and cannot be left in the hands of any government or any minister. Join us for a rally at the aftermarket in a few moments. Rally for truth and for civil rights. Demands for repeal of all emergency legislation. Join us for a rally for truth and for civil rights at the aftermarket in a few moments. Demand that the emergency powers be repealed. Human rights and civil rights can never be left as an arbitrary matter for any government to decide to give or to withdraw as they please. Inalienable rights are inalienable and cannot be dispensed as if they were privileges. Join us for a rally at the aftermarket in a few moments. Join us for a rally at the aftermarket, standing up for truth and for civil rights. Demand for repeal of all emergency powers when they come for renewal on the 21st of March. Demand the removal of emission certificates at the European Union level, where we are trying to extend them for the further 12 months, which infringes our right to travel. These digital certificates have another agenda, which is to act as an identification card. We cannot accept their control and their denial of human rights and privacy. Join us for a rally for truth and civil rights at the aftermarket in a few moments. Demanding the repeal of all emergency legislation. Human rights and civil rights are inalienable and cannot be left in the hands of any minister or any government. It is illegal and if they were not privileged. Rally for truth and civil rights at the aftermarket in a few moments. Demand for repeal of all emergency legislation. Demand for repeal of all emergency powers. Demand for repeal of emergency laws when they come up for renewal before the 31st of March. Lobby your TVs, lobby your MEPs, demanding an end to emergency legislation and the removal of the digital certificates of European Union. These are direct infringements of our fundamental and inalienable human rights. Join us for a rally up here at the Apple Market. Demand repeal of emergency legislation. Demand repeal of emergency legislation is popped up for renewal before the 1st of March. Civil rights and human rights are ours as inalienable rights and cannot be left in the hands of any government. Rally for truth and civil rights. Demand the repeal of emergency powers. Demand the repeal of emergency legislation. Join us here for the rally with speakers to talk about civil rights and the impact of lockdown and the abuse of our human and civil rights.
Cé bhfuil microphone maithaging. Okay, a chuirde, tus nó mise féin. Fáilte ró if anew. There's just a number of three of us, I think, who are going to speak. And we want to alert your attention to the ongoing retention of emergency powers. So I have prepared some remarks which I shall give you. Will I pull away from it? A chuirde nuair hagamid chuig ó chádaí den zais seo cahamid ceist de chlár cadaha óing conna sé cintómid go diochaigh rud éigent as go nairóig ling bach sé das damach freigra fáil doing ach go fíringach ní féidir le héine an ceist an a ragrú doing Im a cás féin Tá blianta fada cata go meid seasa verson cúisina áirithe, ceisina carta phobal, agus is mó a bhíon bím dírithe Mar sin níor a bhíon doubt ach gur seasing I gcuine na díon glasála, mar is sárú na carta is bunúsaí a há ins an reachtaíocht éigeandála agus ins na taistis digital atá chó. An freigra a thugastum féin ná go cahamid seasamh le chéile éon aim a bháin. Sé sin chun áilréig leis na grúpaí saimithe I bolaíocht na tíre agus déan phobalacht a bhanú ina bhfuil cócht I lábha na Saoránaigh. Sin an aim a bhí ag ár sínsir roing ach foréir níor éirigh ló chmad nuair a bhaníoidir Sin job a há fácha doing. Táimse ag súil leis an job son a críoch nó. Friends, when we come to places like this, we must ask the question, why and what do we want? How can we ensure that something worthwhile comes out of it? It would be nice if someone could hand us the answer, but that cannot be. Each of us can only answer for ourselves. I have been fighting on issues of fundamental rights for many years, and so it was no question but that I would oppose this lockdown. The emergency powers and the digital certificates are an attack on the most fundamental of our human rights. We have to stand against such things. When I say that we must answer for ourselves as to why we are here and what we expect from it, that is probably the most important question any of us should ask ourselves today. I have always said I stand for a single thing called the empowerment of the people. I want to see a country where the people rule in practice, not just on paper. I want to see a country where the powerful vested interests that rule over us are cast aside permanently. But nobody can give us such a thing. We have to take it ourselves. My hope for today is that we are advancing that aim because we are getting organised. The empowerment of the people requires that individuals empower themselves, that we stop simply taking our ideas from RTE, God forbid, or from anybody else. If we want to understand what is happening in our society, we have to think for ourselves. We must think so that our struggle is guided, so that we know where we're going. That means leaving behind all the sacred cows. All the assumptions we adopted along the way must be questioned. The fairy tale presented as politics must be rewritten. If all we do is respond to the latest atrocity of government, in anger or otherwise, then we allow those who rule over us to set the agenda. We must set our own agenda. The powers that be rule by lies. So if something is condemned, it might well mean that the truth lies behind it. Answering for ourselves will empower us, and if we do that together, we are an unbeatable force. Empowering ourselves is the only alternative to living under a system of rule by decree or dictatorship, whatever you like to call it. We have been propagandized our whole lives, even for generations. We have been told that greed is a good thing, that it encourages enterprise and therefore helps society. Always ask, who is served by such statements? If human nature is really naturally bad and evil, then what is the point in trying to change anything? In truth, human nature is a thing to love. Humans are good by nature. We care for our fellow humans. It is only a narrow segment of our society that spreads the lie, to divide us and to weaken our ability to resist, while they enrich themselves at our expense. So, I don't wish to enter too much into philosophy here, but the message is that individuals need to investigate things and arrive at your own conclusions. We work out ideas through debate and through struggle, like by being here today. Just like an apprentice cannot master their trade without on-the-job experience, neither can we understand the problems we face until we face them head-on. That is essential to learning. We are doing that here today, facing the problems head-on, declaring our love for human rights, for civilization, and for each other. Today's event is hosted by the Independent Campaign for Truth and Proper Healthcare. We want you to build this campaign nationally and invite you to stand with us in doing that. The main restrictions that we have endured over the last 2 years have now been removed. However, it would be a mistake to think that the problem is gone. It isn't. The powers that be have advanced their own cause, they have enriched themselves at our expense, and they have equipped themselves with more powers than have ever existed in the history of the state. We must campaign to have the emergency powers voted down when they come up for renewal before the 31st of March. We must lobby and ask each TD to vote no. We must visit their constituency offices, phone them, write to them, email them, demand that they stand up and respect our fundamental rights. We must demand that our MEPs vote no to extending the European Union's digital certificate for a further 12 months, which they intend to do following the end of June, when they should naturally expire. We must demand the rejection of the World Health Organization's new international treaty on how pandemics should be handled, forcing us into deeper control of the likes of Big Pharma and globalist dictate. By removing the main restrictions, government has taken the heat out of street protests. The conditions have changed. They want us to go home. In this period, we must continue to organise to keep the banner of freedom flying. There are many projects under discussion. A big one is the need to develop independent media, new journalism that is based on truth. We must also consolidate our networking nationally. In order to organise discussion in every town and village, people are encouraged to step forward, to think independently, and most importantly, to act and build this broad-based people's movement for truth and for rights. We will continue with street protests, even though on a smaller scale. Next week we march in Cork City. The following week we do it in Galway. And on the 19th of March, we take to the streets in Dublin. If we put enough pressure on TDs, we may well see the renewal of emergency powers defeated. Last time out, the vote was narrow enough, except that the political party games between them allowed absence, which allowed it to be passed. It is possible too for the European Union Parliament to reject the digital certificate, but I think that less likely. We are asking all those who have campaigned to join us in a discussion after here this evening, to join us, make sure there's contact details, and put forward the ideas. How can we advance this campaign in these new conditions? We can have a bright future if we choose to have it. There will be public meetings arranged following this period of campaigning up at the end of March. There will be public meetings arranged all over the country in which this discussion needs to be had. Because while the restrictions have been withdrawn, still the government has unprecedented power that at the stroke of a pen, they can make it a crime for you to go outside your front door if someone deems you had not reasonable excuse for doing so. This is not an acceptable thing in any society which claims to aspire to democracy. Together we are strong, and together we will win. This is not a matter of doubt, it is absolute. We will win this. There is no doubt whatsoever about it. So go to Mila Maga Bacorda, Berbua. Anish, Corrigi Fault, Dinner Devor Minter Fain, Noreen Barron, one of your own from the great city of Waterford. Go to Magav.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Great. So, for the last 2 years, we have been subjected to the most horrific coercive abuse. Constant lies, deliberate confusion, goalpost changing, relentless fear and guilt mongering. One of the most traumatic outcomes of frightening people every day, a well-known tactic used to control them, is that many people have been conditioned into believing that humans are dangerous vectors of disease, which has changed society on a profound level. People no longer feel safe and are suffering terribly with their mental health, especially children. Constant fear over a period of time changes how our brain is wired, especially the developing brain of a child. What they have been put through over the last 2 years is truly heinous, and I think the effects are going to be felt for years to come. The gaslighting, which means the denial of someone's reality around the detrimental effects of mask wearing alone, particularly on children's speech, their development, how they pick up on social and safety cues conveyed by voice and facial expressions has been devastating. Lockdowns has also had disaster effects, the third being the worst and longest, with prolonged isolation, which in prisons is used as a punishment. There are over 49 scientific papers showing lockdowns just don't work. In addition to masks and lockdowns, children are being expected to take risks with an experimental products and to shoulder responsibility they should never even have to contemplate. They do not understand the gravity of what they're being manipulated into because of their developmental stage. Children are vulnerable. Why aren't they being protected? It is outrageous that children are being asked to protect adults. Emotional safety is just as important as physical safety, but it is not taken seriously enough. This is total cluelessness about what constitutes real health and resilience. When we are continuously frightened, high levels of inflammation are produced, which takes a huge toll on our physical, particularly on our immune system health and mental health. The powers that be say they are doing this for our health and safety, but the evidence says otherwise. Look at what people do, not what they say. Who will take responsibility for this carnage? Judging by history, absolutely no one. The book will be passed back and forth. There might be an expensive tribunal paid for by us with absolutely no accountability or meaningful changes. We need to ensure that this never happens again. We need real health and real science, not the misinformation, lies and quackery we are subjected to on a daily basis under the guise of so-called health and safety. There is a name for what we are being put through, and it's called psychological warfare, whose primary purpose is to reduce morale and mental well-being. Manipulative tactics such as propaganda are used to intimidate and persuade people. Propaganda is ideas or statements that are false or exaggerated and deliberately spread to influence the masses. Think back to the start of 2020 when we saw people falling dead in the streets on television. The mainstream media are culpable for being the main vehicle for pushing the horrendous fear. But who directs them to do this? They are the people who really hold the reins of control. The goal of psychological warfare is to intentionally break down a person's will without using physical force. All you need is their compliance, and the powers that be have that in buckets because of the fear being waged at every turn. Belgian psychologist Matthias Desmet has talked a lot about how the masses have been hypnotised into complying. I know from being a hypnotherapist that it is impossible to hypnotise someone without their consent. They have to want the suggestions being given to them, which is why not everyone was hypnotised. People with critical thinking skills and the ability to question what was going on could not be hypnotised. To make them look bad for not following the tyrannical quackery, a smear campaign was launched against them. Anything and everything was used to make them look dodgy and dubious so the government and the mainstream could continue on with their agenda of getting everyone vaccinated. It's the age-old technique of divide and conquer, and we shouldn't fall for it. On the 27th of January 2021, the Council of Europe, which encompasses the European Court of Human Rights, stated that 1. Ensure that citizens are informed that the vaccination is not mandatory and that no one is under political, social or other pressure to be vaccinated if they do not wish to do so. And 2, ensure that no one is discriminated against for not having been vaccinated due to possible health risks or not wanting to be vaccinated. Did this happen? No, the exact opposite happened. We had the Minister for Health, Stephen Donnelly, actually declaring war on the unvaccinated. The Council of Europe did not speak out when they saw people being subjected to the most horrific forms of coercive abuse, which included being manipulated, locked down, isolated, frightened, threatened, smeared, insulted, misrepresented, guilted, losing their livelihoods and businesses and having no access to healthcare, including organ transplants, not being able to visit loved ones, even those who were dying and alone, and being segregated and discriminated against in order to force us into getting vaccinated. We need to remember that this virus has a survival rate of 99.95% for people under 70 and 99.997% for children. Why on earth would anyone need to be vaccinated for a virus that they are not at risk for? The people at risk are people in their 80s with underlying conditions, the average being 4 underlying conditions. And there are over 70 studies showing that natural immunity is far superior and longer lasting to the immunity provided by the drugs, which lasts at most for a few months, if that. This is why boosters are needed, 4 per year at the last count. People are being blackmailed and coerced into falsely protecting the vulnerable by taking drugs that do not prevent contraction or transmission. Have you heard the term herd immunity lately? I haven't. Why is that? Could it be because only natural immunity can provide herd immunity and not the miracle vaccines that we were promised would return us all to normality, which hasn't happened? At a Senate hearing in the US, Dr. Peter Doty, who is senior editor of the British Medical Journal and teaches a course on how to critically appraise the medical literature, called attention to the fact that the definition of vaccines was changed in January 2021. The new definition includes this addition, quote, a preparation of genetic material such as a strand of synthesized messenger RNA that is used by the cells of the body to produce an antigenic substance, such as a fragment of virus spike protein, end quote. Dr. Joshi argues that mRNA products, which everybody calls vaccines, are qualitatively different than standard vaccines. He asks, what if these injections were called drugs instead? Would you take a dose of this drug every 6 months for possibly the rest of your life if that's what it took for the drug to stay effective? In October 2020, Dr. Doty critiqued the vaccine trials and discovered that they were only being trialled to reduce COVID symptoms. Why? We were told repeatedly that this was the new normal until a vaccine arrives. These drugs were called vaccines in order to get billions of people to take them, and billions took them thinking that they and others were and are being protected. Did they know that they were not actually vaccines? They could not have given true informed consent if they did not and do not know this. The COVID digital certificate, or vaccine passport, was introduced for international travel to supposedly keep everyone safe. To get the certificate, the drugs, including the boosters, that don't prevent contraction or transmission, need to be taken or your vaccine passport expires. Even though many restrictions have suddenly been axed, the EU has sought the extension of the vaccine passport from June 2022 until June 2023. Why? Have you noticed that everything has been announced in stages over the last 2 years? Restrictions have been staggered across the world so we don't all revolt at once. Just look at Canada and Australia. We were told back in March 2020 that it would take 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and yet here we are 2 years later. If we had been told the truth, that it would in fact have been 2 years, there would have been uproar. And the same thing is happening with vaccine passports. They are not going to tell you that they intend to keep them forever. Did you know back in 2018, the EU was already aiming to bring in vaccine passports? Why? Before COVID even happened. Hopefully you will see why this was why this is and was the most important restriction imposed on all of us all along. And once it was introduced and accepted by us, it was never going to go away. The World Economic Forum has rightfully called the vaccine passport a digital identity. The vaccine passport, or the EU digital certificate, whatever you want to call it, was always a gateway to creating digital identities, which will be the only way we will access everything in the future if the powers that be have their way. This might sound okay to you until you realise that it can be revoked depending on what you do, what you say, if you criticise the government. Exactly what happens in China and what happened recently in Canada when people had their bank accounts frozen, and even the people who contributed to the protests could have that happen. The World Economic founder, Klaus Schwab, wrote a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset, and published it in July 2020. Why? What have the World Economic Forum got to do with health? This is what the World Economic Forum says about digital identities on its website. Quote, "Human-centric digital identity lets people know who they are dealing with without revealing more than the strictly necessary information. Digital identities give the user control of their data. They provide clear audit trails and streamline how businesses and governments allow people, they allow us, to register and access their services and trade. It has great potential for online education, including employment credentials, fighting fraud, or proving one's health status. Proving one's health status. Let that sink in for a moment. That means taking these drugs for life, so you can access life with your digital identity, which will be dependent upon you getting X amount of boosters per year that don't prevent transmission or contraction. There have been hundreds of thousands of serious injuries and tens of thousands of deaths from these products across the world to date. And they have not all been reported, and there is a lot of denial around these vaccine injuries and deaths. So the figures are very likely a lot higher. And we haven't even seen their long-term effects yet. It is a mass experiment, and we are the guinea pigs. This is no future for anyone. It's a dystopia. It appears very likely that COVID was manufactured in a lab, and this isn't a conspiracy theory anymore. It has been confirmed by the mainstream media and other scientists. We are being conned into taking so-called vaccines that don't prevent transmission or contraction. We are being conned into taking a passport that doesn't provide safety or health. And we are being conned into believing that digital identities are the natural outcome of vaccine passports, and that they will solve a multitude of problems. The truth is staring us in the face. Do we have the courage to see it so we can transform it? We have the choice to stop complying with tyranny. There is huge strength and power in numbers. Let's stand together for freedom, choice, real health, real science, and a good life. The world's children deserve that.
Thank you very much, Noreen. Very informative, very thorough statement, in particular, I think, regarding our children. And I heard a Corgi Photo of Corky Ella. You all know Peter Donoghue, the pioneer of Monday marching, and a man vigorous in fighting for rights over the last year. So, Peter, so good.
Thank you very much. I have to extend this off. There we go. Hello everyone, how are you getting on? It's great to be here in Waterford today. I spent a few months here many years ago and with great crack, so we had. But I suppose the reason why I am here today is I believe in freedom and I believe in true democracy. And I believe at this moment in time that our freedom and democracy is under the greatest threat that we've ever witnessed or seen in the history of this state. Never before have we seen or witnessed anything like this. And I think we all have to stand up and make people aware of this, what is actually happening at this moment in time, because many people are totally unaware and oblivious of what is actually happening to our democracy and to our democratic rights. Like many people here are walking past, they don't actually know what's truly happening at the moment. And I suppose our democratic rights have been under great threat with a long time now, but especially over the last 2 years with COVID-19 and the legislation that was put in place, we saw a huge attack on our rights, on our human rights and our civil rights. and these rights were taken from us under the pretext of protecting us from COVID-19. And these restrictions that were put in place, they've done huge damage to our society in every way. They've damaged our society physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and financially. And at this moment in time, we can see the media, we're talking now about the huge inflation that's happening at the moment, and the cost of living is rising. And this is a direct result of the restrictions that were put in place that shut this country down and shut most of the world down with the last 2 years. And this is a direct result of these restrictions. And these restrictions as well, they destroyed many families. There was parents couldn't see their grandparents, or children couldn't go see their children, and you were prevented from going outside the door of your house. And these are our individual rights, these are our human rights, and these are decisions that we should make. No government should ever dictate to you how you should live your own life. You should create your own life for yourself. So at this moment in time, what we're seeing is our rights being taken away. And there, as we can see now, there was very little justification for the denial of these human rights over the last 2 years, because there's many countries out there throughout the world who didn't implement these restrictions. And not alone did they just do just as well as we did, but they actually probably did better for the most part, like Sweden and certain states in America who never implemented restrictions did just as well as the countries who implemented severe restrictions. So in my opinion, there was never any justification for these restrictions, but at this moment in time, there can be absolutely no justification whatsoever. So then the legislation that's still in place at this moment in time, there can be no justification for it now. It has to be abolished immediately, and it's due to expire now on the 31st of March. And what we've seen in the past is, in the weeks or the few days coming up to the due date of the expiration of the legislation, that a vote has taken place up in Dáil Éireann, and these votes, the media has literally not even covered these votes in the past. Probably the most important votes that have ever taken place in the history of Dáil Éireann, and the media didn't even acknowledge them. And what we've seen, the politicians, they've extended legislation again and again and again. And there can be no justification now for the extension of the legislation that has done so much damage to our society. Remember, this legislation enforced discrimination and segregation in our country. This legislation divided families, it divided friends, it divided neighbours. This legislation cannot be continued indefinitely. And this is what they will try to do. They will try and keep it going indefinitely until next winter, when again sickness will come back like it does every winter, and they will impose more restrictions, because as it stands at this moment in time, the restrictions can be brought back like that. They can bring it back in the morning. So that's why I'm here. Like I started, I'm just an ordinary person, you know. The first time I ever protested was a year ago, and I see these boxes here underneath me, and we're above in Cork. It was the 6th of March, and a year we had gone through these lockdowns, and I just said enough is enough. I'm not putting up with this anymore. And I remember that day above in Cork, and I remember we were vilified in the media. The politicians, I remember Neil Redmond, he said anybody involved in that march should be arrested. And I remember looking at these boxes that I'm standing on, and I remember thinking, if I stand on those boxes, I'm going to be arrested. And their helicopter was over our head. Do you remember that, Dermot? There was Gardaí, about 20, 30 of them behind me. But I knew it wasn't a choice I had, like, there was no decision there. I had to do it. We all have to do it. We all have to stand up for our rights, because there is no alternative. Because if we don't stand up for our rights now, they'll be gone for the rest of our lives. And not alone our lives, but our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives. So this is a pivotal moment in our history, a pivotal moment which many people are totally unaware of. So that's why I'm here. And I suppose Diarmuid and Noreen touched on it, but this is not alone taking place in Ireland, it's taking place throughout the world. And many people might not know of the World Economic Forum, but basically what is being implemented in this world at this moment in time is a centralised world government, where basically giant corporations will govern the world from a centralised government. And basically we will be controlled and all our rights will be taken from us. And this has happened in the past in many countries, you know, where people's individual freedom was taken from them. And it was collectivism, and collectivism in any form has been a disaster always in the past, be it Mao in China, Stalin in Russia, Hitler in Nazi Germany. It's always ended up in disaster, because the most important thing we have in our lives, it's not how much money we have in our bank account, it's not our house, it's not our car, but it's our individual freedom. That is the most important thing that we all have in our lives. And Carl Jung, he's the founder of analytical psychiatry, one of the greatest psychiatrists and psychologists of our time. And he said the most important thing you have is your individual freedom. And when that is taken from you, you have nothing. So we must stand up now, and we must stand up for our individual freedom. And I just want, some people might be getting disillusioned as well, and they might think that, you know, we're fighting a losing battle. I just want to remind you that these people, for them to succeed, they have to control every single person, each and every one of us. And as long as you stand up against them, as long as one of us says no, then they have not succeeded. So let's say no. Thanks, everyone.
Traditionally, at these events, we like to bring the formal proceedings to an end, but don't go away. We want to have this discussion with people directly. So, but just to bring the formal thing to an end, can I invite Shirley, who will give us our own Navian. And I ask you, please, let's join in and sing this together, because this is it's our song and it's our country, and let's be proud of it.
Sheena feena foil, I don't we Gallagherin, we lost slew, our Shandir Shinshir Vasta Niok Winter on love Wintroil and log them Savannah boil Legion boil cotton boss no sail Legion Ashquid we love and up shall live gonic
I suppose many of us we don't actually know what our national anthem means. So I'm going to sing it in English now, so everybody will understand what it actually means. And remember, as our ancestors, this is the song for them and what they fought and died for. Soldiers are we, whose lives are pledged to Ireland. Some have come from a land across the sea, sworn to be free. No more an ancient Ireland shall shelter the despot or the slave. Tonight we man the Barnab well in Erin's cause come the mower will mid cannon roar and rifles peal. We sing a soldier song. And we are the soldiers today, everyone.
Now, folks, as I said, please engage with us here.
I got a picture of that.
Make sure there are contacts, people who want to build this campaign, and liaise with us. Also, we have bundles of flyers here, which people might like to take if they wish, and just be known to us. So, go to Mila Mahagav.